Tampering with non-prescription drugs is a story we've all heard about. Cyanide-laced Tylenol and Excedrin capsules have killed 10 people. But there's another type of drug tampering going on that's more subtle, far more pervasive, and maybe more dangerous. An underground market of prescription drugs is delivering millions of outdated pills to doctors and pharmacists, and they're passing them on to you. Contaminated pills, pills that don't work. The scam has become so widespread that even small-town neighborhood drugstores are vulnerable.
We're cruising along in your afternoon time, 12 minutes past the hour. KDY, your music connection in West Plains.
Trust is an important ingredient in your prescription. If you have a question about your prescriptions, come by and talk to our pharmacists, John Taylor or Lynn Drago Hubbard.
This radio commercial began running after the FBI stunned the people of West Plains, Missouri by raiding 2 local pharmacies, one in a department store and this one called Burton Creek.
We're here to execute a federal search warrant on your drugstore.
Sure.
And we'd like you to open up.
Okay.
An FBI undercover investigation found that prescription drugs, outdated, contaminated, and virtually ineffective, were allegedly being sold by the thousands to the people of West Plains by this man, Wayne Pruitt, a pharmacist they trusted.
We found birth control pills that were outdated 5, some 10 years, heart medications, antiarthritics, antibiotics, medications for small children, medications for the elderly. There were medications that touched almost every element of our society.
Agent Carl Christensen, who headed the investigation, also led the midnight raid.
Practices like this, occur with complete disregard for the public's health. And people like pharmacists are people that we place trust in. And obviously, in some instances, that trust is misplaced.
I think I'm the best pharmacist that's ever been in West Plains. No mistake.
Many of Wayne Pruitt's customers agreed, until the raid. For 32 years, Pruitt had built a lucrative business and a reputation as one of the town's leading citizens. But the FBI says his success came in part through the sale of contaminated and outdated drugs. Drugs he stole or bought illegally at cut-rate prices and then sold for big profits to his customers. Pruitt allegedly bought these drugs from suppliers who diverted them from normal distribution channels. Agents say both the suppliers and Pruitt removed them from their original packaging and dumped them into plastic bags to hide the fact that they were outdated or doctor's samples.
We're talking about this little bitty part that we did, that I said that I shouldn't have done. If I wanted to guess, I would guess 1 to 3%, under 5%.
It's a substantial amount. Without getting into percentages, it's substantial. To me, several $100,000 is a substantial quantity of pharmaceuticals.
I cannot even begin to tell you the names of the medication. There were just so many.
Donna Burgess worked at the Burton Creek Pharmacy for 2 years before she quit last January and began working at this drugstore. Living in a small town made her fearful of speaking out, but she says she set aside her concerns to follow her conscience.
Someone would come in, they happened to have a prescription for birth control pills that we didn't normally carry, and there were some outdated ones that were in the back. This girl is going to get pregnant, and this really bothered me, that maybe this was going on not just here but everywhere else. And what if at some point my mother was in the nursing home and she was getting outdated medication, or someone that I loved came in contact with this, and I had done nothing. I would feel responsible because I hadn't done anything to stop it.
It would have been virtually impossible to identify and penetrate, operations like these without someone coming forward and telling the truth.
Through people like Donna Burgess, the FBI has learned how drug diversion works.
When an item is taken out of its original packaging, and it's considered adulterated. It no longer has its original identity. It's placed into bags like these without any lot numbers or expiration dates. In some instances, Some of the manufacturers have actually printed the word sample on the tablets or capsules. So here's a capsule that had the word sample imprinted on it, and as you can see, that's been removed.
Those at the pharmacy that had sample written on them, were they also sold to the public that way?
No, we would scrape it off.
And you were directed to do this by?
By Wayne Pruitt.
Routinely?
Routinely, daily, yeah.
What kinds of methods did you use to remove the word sample on these pills and capsules? Were there different ways of doing it?
On like a tablet where it's stamped into it. A fingernail file, an emery board, okay, and you just scrape the tablet away where it says sample.
And that reduces the size of the dosage?
Right, right. I knew that too. And part of the reason I knew that is because while I was scraping this stuff, this dust would just go everywhere. I got headaches from doing this, you know, from breathing that stuff.
You must have been doing a lot of tablet scraping.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. A lot.
Burgess says that to supplement his supply of cut-rate drugs, Pruitt directed her to steal samples from doctors' offices located in the same building. And federal agents charged that Pruitt was so greedy that he made rounds at local nursing homes, removing prescription drugs from the effects of dead patients and reselling them.
I would see him bring them back from the nursing home, the blister packs, and, you know, he would say, I brought these back from the nursing homes, you need to punch these out into the bottles.
Pruitt denied that he ever resold drugs from nursing homes or that he stole drugs from doctors' offices. Even so, these charges have all of West Plains talking.
I wasn't surprised because people do anything for money, you know.
I just don't want no part of it. I sure don't want my grandkids or my children to take it either.
What was the most disturbing thing to you about it?
Well, it didn't really shock me because he just happened to be one of the few that got caught.
If the FBI raided all pharmacies, what would they find? You know, you might be shocked to know what you'd find in the rest of them.
In fact, the FBI is finding that Missouri has a significant prescription drug problem. Agents say that Pruitt was buying outdated drugs from a pharmacist about 100 miles up the road, who was also supplying other drugstores. And this is likely only a small link in the underground marketing chain. What's happening here is happening all over the country. So far, 51 pharmacists, doctors, and drug wholesalers have admitted selling unreliable prescription drugs. Some have been fined. Nearly half are in prison. Knowing what you know from your own hearings and from the FBI, is this problem of diversion being solved or almost solved, or are you just into the tip of the iceberg?
We believe we have done, at most, a scratching of the surface.
Michigan Congressman John Dingell, whose committee is investigating drug diversion, has found that outdated pharmaceuticals have been sold to an unsuspecting public for decades. A new round of hearings on the problem and what to do about it are expected next week. But so far, Congress has taken no action.
It must be simply observed that the peril here is one that concerns anyone who understands the importance of safe, clean, effective, and unadulterated prescription pharmaceutical. The person who lives in a rural area has a chance to be victimized just as much as a fellow who would be in the city.
Last week, Wayne Pruitt was indicted by a federal grand jury on 11 counts of adulterating and misbranding prescription drugs. If convicted, he faces up to $2 million in fines and 54 years in prison. This week in Geneva, the United States and the Soviet Union are again talking about how to reduce the thousands of nuclear warheads each has aimed at the other. While they're far removed from the high-level talks, the two people we want you to meet tonight know much more about nuclear war than those negotiators in Geneva. They've been living with the horrible images of radiation and death since the summer of 1945, when the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan.
All you could see is that cloud rising, bubbling, with greenish, purple, orange fire in it, boiling and churning inside. picture of hell. It was just like Dante's Inferno.
I was under everything. That was two-story building, and I was underneath.
"40 years ago, Kermit Behan of Houston, Texas, was the American bombardier. Misako Coronel, now a San Diego beautician, was less than a mile from ground zero. The date, August 9, 1945. The place, Nagasaki, Japan. Behind these doors at the Air Force Museum in Ohio is the B-29 that carried the bomb. Kermit Behan hadn't seen the plane since he left the South Pacific in 1945.
There it is, an old airplane. Look at that thing. I'll be darned.
Kermit's war record reads like a script from a John Wayne film. 44 missions as a gunner and bombardier, twice shot down over enemy territory, a decorated American hero. But it would be his last mission that the world would remember. He was recruited for the secret project by Squadron Commander Colonel Paul Tibbets.
He didn't tell me much about it. He said, we got a special thing come up that may help to bring the war to an early end. As I recall, that's all he said. He said, we got a gimmick. We got a new weapon, we call it a gimmick. But don't speculate, don't try to guess what it is. Just go ahead and do your job. After the Hiroshima mission, it was decided to give him the old 1-2 punch.
The second punch was a plutonium bomb called Fat Man. It was carried on a B-29 like this one. The primary target, Kokura.
There was some anxiety about the mission, and I don't think we all slept extremely sound the night before.
There was good reason for Kermit's anxiety. The flight was plagued by fuel and weather problems. Behan was ordered not to drop the bomb unless he could actually see the target through his viewfinder. Radar was not to be used. So Kokura was saved by cloud cover.
We made our initial approach. I said, no drop, can't see it. So we circled and came back 180 degrees the opposite way. Still couldn't see the target. At that time, I knew it was hopeless. And so we left a primary target, Kokura, and took a direct line to Nagasaki.
On that summer morning, Misako Coronel was 12 years old. School was out, and she was in the center of Nagasaki with her 5-year-old brother.
The weather over Nagasaki visibility was very poor. 8 to 9/10 cloud cover. I was just straining to try to see something. And about 5 minutes down bomber, I saw a hole over to the right open up and got a brief glimpse of what appeared to be the specified aiming point. Right in the area of the cloud was an oval racetrack. Now, that's not much a thing to hit with an atomic bomb, people say. But I knew that thing was so much like a bullseye on a target. I could put my crosshairs on there and synchronize with much quicker than I was aiming at something else. So I aimed at the oval racetrack.
But then when I heard the plane, I don't know, I know this, that's not Japanese.
Bombs away, we pulled down our goggles and executed the breakaway. And as I said, even with goggles on, the flash was very brilliant.
Right after, I see the lightning, and then big sound. That's all.
Our first reaction, by golly, the gimmick, as we call it, worked. It works. And I had a momentary feeling of elation that all the effort went into it, that whatever they were doing worked. And then when I saw this ground thing floating out miles around the city, I said, my God, that must have done terrible damage.
I heard my brother, calling, help me. And I have to carry him because he can't walk. But in no way I can tell which way I should go because the whole it's on fire. The next day we start early we see so many people, burned, and some of them lied on the street, or, So then my brother said, maybe, one of them our father. So we better start looking for it. He was only 5, but then he knows, our father, he didn't make it to the home.
They wandered the city for 3 days looking for their father. Finally, they found their way home. Masako's father was already there, but the bomb blast had burned 90% of his body.
But then he was strong, I think, because he still was worried, about us and everything. But then it got worse and worse. He died September the 1st, 3-4 days before. I guess he can't stand it, so he keep asking me, if you can kill me, just one, I really appreciate it, he said.
I don't want to go through life with a burden of guilt and regrets that just bury me down to the ground. And again, I go back to my old saying, that as bad and cruel as it was, it probably ended up saving lives in the long run.
On that day, did you hate the Americans?
No, I didn't hate the American. No, that was my father. I don't know why. But then he always said, although he was suffering so bad, he said, well, you can't help it. He keeps saying, you don't hate the people. What you gain, you hate another person. Even I hate you, he won't come back.
Today, if one of the survivors or several of the survivors were to meet you, what would you say to them?
I'll say I'm sorry. And sincerely say I'm sorry, and mean it. I don't know what else I could say, because I am sorry.
The mission report, filed by the crew the day after Nagasaki, reads in part, after explosion, a column rose to 50,000 feet. Considerable smoke observed. 5 shock waves felt. Bombing results, fair to good. Mission, effective.
They are usually described as poor, lazy, addicted, mentally ill, and sometimes exploited. We know them as the homeless. An estimated 2 to 3 million people in this country are beginning another winter looking for shelter. But who are these people? In many cases, they just don't fit the stereotype. In growing numbers, they are people who had a job and a bank account yesterday and are out on the street today. But why are they homeless? In one city, in one shelter, we went asking. On the outskirts of downtown Phoenix, wedged between a rail yard, a lumber yard, and a graveyard, is a place they call the Park. These few dusty acres are home to 1,500 people a year. When you first get here, you sleep on the ground. Within a week, you have to begin looking for a job if you're able, or leave. Some people are unwilling or unable to seek employment, but many had steady work before they got here. In the Southwest, 3/4 of the homeless are newly unemployed. J.R. Murphy didn't always live like this. Among his few belongings is one precious reminder of his past.
A keepsake, I guess, you could say. It tells about all the things, a lot of the things that I backed and fought for.
It's a tattered campaign pamphlet from when he was Joe Murphy, Republican state representative, Delaware's outstanding young man.
He was a pretty happy-go-lucky guy. Belonged to a private country club. Played golf. In a large house.
We had everything you could want. It was very nice. A dog in the backyard. Yeah.
Across the street from the golf course.
Across the street from the golf course.
Joe and I both played golf.
Yeah, we'd walk over and we'd play golf, tennis, swimming. Regular country club type life. I guess growing up, we really didn't know that other people didn't have that, and we didn't know how fortunate we were.
It was a good life. Joe Murphy was the kind of guy who, from the very beginning, you know, if you told him something needed to be done, by God, he looked at it. He would go after it hard.
Mike Castle is now governor of Delaware. He started in politics the same year as
It
J.R.
had to be done because he was an activist. He was the kind of person who was going to represent his people as well as he could.
But when Joe Murphy ran for the state senate and lost, he was out of a job. And that began a series of events that turned his middle-class American dream into a nightmare.
The last few years weren't the best years. Ours was a monetary, basically, thing. And I just couldn't handle that. And so we separated and divorced finally.
I knew that if I stayed around the East Coast, especially Delaware, there was a good possibility that I would become depressed. So I just left. Flew out to Denver.
Left everything behind?
Yes.
Your house, your cars?
Right.
Then came the worst blow, the shock of his daughter's suicide.
There was a lot of depression. A lot of depression then. Tremendous amount. But I really don't want to talk about it.
Okay, so you got to Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking around Phoenix.
Right.
On your trip. What happened here?
Well, after I decided that I was going to stay here, I liked what I saw. I decided I'd go out and start looking for a job. And it was one of these days when I was out looking for a job that I was in an automobile accident. When I came out of the hospital, all I had was the clothes on my back.
He's a very proud man. He chose not to seek his family's help. He wanted to weather the storm on his own. To see what happened to him, you realize it can happen to anybody, and not just the people that are in asylums or that are born in poverty. Here's a man who had a lot going for him, and because of an unfortunate accident in Phoenix, he became one of the homeless.
There are more and more people like JR on the streets these days.
How you doing?
More and more homelessness is striking at people who are middle class or even above.
Mary Orton runs this publicly funded shelter and its programs.
We had a USFL team here that folded, of course, when the league folded. Very well-paid people up to their ears in credit card debt, unwilling or unable to accept that they were on a very fast downhill slide, and they end up at the homeless shelter. It's quite a shock. It's not just an issue of a few aberrant human beings who are drunks or crazy. 40% of the people on the street are employable. Now, some of them may need some job training, but they are able to hold down a job.
J.R. Murphy considers himself one of the lucky ones.
How are you? How you doing?
He got low-wage, part-time work helping with job counseling.
There you go.
And he's ventured back into politics, giving his experienced lobbying advice to a homeless advocates group.
You're legal as long as you do it within 60 days after you file with the commission. That's all.
His constituency is no longer middle-class homeowners, but the homeless. It's become the most passionate political cause of his life.
I know there's people out there that are going to say that homeless people are bums, tramps, alcoholics, dopeheads, and people who just don't want to work. That's true to a certain degree, but it's such a small percentage. You're only talking about maybe 5% who are in that category. There's a lot of skilled people in this camp. I'm talking about engineers, I'm talking about bricklayers, I'm talking about mechanics, roofers, iron workers. Men who are qualified here are going out, and as soon as the employer finds out that his address is 1209 West Madison, he knows it's a shelter, and the man never gets the job, even though he's qualified for it. I can't prove that, but I've heard it so often and so often by men who've walked 12 miles to get to an interview. 12 miles to get to an interview, and then 12 miles back. I think that the society that I was in, and I was part of it, never really looked at homeless people. Circumstances have put them in a situation that they don't want to be in, never wanted to be in, and a lot of them never thought they would be in. But they're in it, and they work very hard to get themselves out of it.
Toward twilight, people in the camp gather around bonfires to talk. mostly about hard work turned to hard luck.
We're just people like everyone else. It's just that we haven't had a stroke of bad luck or what have you. She's never had to be out here in this situation before. What happened? Job just fizzled out. They finally completed the job, and therefore I had to leave town.
You get out and to apply for a job, they want to know your address. What kind of an address you're going to give them? And the first thing as soon as they find out you're out here, they don't want you. They don't need you.
What would you have said if somebody had told you 6 months ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, hey, you guys are going to be homeless. You guys aren't going to have a place to hang your hat.
I wouldn't believe it, because I've never stood in a soup line in my life. I've never been down to apply for food stamps, nothing like that. I've never done that.
Have you tried to get a job here? What do you want to do here?
Anything, but who wants to hire a woman that's over 60?
Have you tried?
Yes, I have. And they say, where do you live? I says, Tent City. Forget it.
Annie, how do you feel about yourself being in a place like this?
I don't like it. Would you like it? I don't like it at all. But what choice do I have? It's here or death.
The lack of affordable housing is the biggest problem, and unless and until this community and communities around the country begin to deal with that issue, then we are going to see this problem of homelessness grow into more of a crisis than it is now.
A man can go out and he gets a job. Let's say he's making $4.50 an hour. If he goes out, let's say for a decent apartment that he can live in, say it costs him $250 a month, there's probably a $150 security deposit. There's a $100 deposit fee to turn on the electricity. There's a $50 fee to turn on the gas.
You're saying that even with a job, he can't
Even
afford
with
it?
a job, he can't afford it. He can afford it for maybe a month or a month and a half. But then he's going to get evicted because he's not going to be able to pay his rent.
Oh, I got lots of soup.
Okay.
Lots of soup.
When you look at these people through the eyes of a former state legislator, has the system failed?
There is a failure in the system, and the system's failure, one of them, is unemployment. It's a tough thing for a legislative body to legislate jobs, because when they do that, they know that it's going to cost the taxpayers money. And legislators do not like to go into the taxpayer's pocket. But there are times when they're going to have to bite the bullet and do it for the good of society. What they'll do is they'll talk to you, they'll find out what your skills are, whether you're skilled or semi-skilled or something like that, and then send you to a job counselor, and we'll try and find you a job.
Well, we're skilled in lots of different areas, so.
Well, okay.
But in the meantime, so what do we do?
Take the worst bum of all. Maybe no one's ever taken him by the arm and said, look, if you're not job prepared, we'll give you job training, and then we'll search for a job for you. You got your bedrolls now?
Oh, well, we got a blanket today, but I'm pregnant.
Maybe no one's ever done this to these people. And I think that that's where society should come in and say, we owe them that much. Listen, I've got a pregnant woman in the front row here, and I think we need to get a blanket or two for them.
Just need some cover over us.
Where can we get a blanket?
They might have some extra ones in the men's shelter.
In the men's shelter? Okay.
Might talk to Chuck.
Yeah, I'll go see that. Why don't you wait here? I'll be back.
Thank you, sir. Jerry, let me ask you something. Why should I care about these people?
Because I believe that society dictates that you care for them. And if you don't care for them, then you're not a member of the society. Keep that baby warm.
J.R. Murphy is still counseling the homeless, but he and another former resident of the park have pooled their money and recently moved into an apartment. They hope they can make enough to stay off the street.
Hi, welcome to West 57. I'm John Ferrugia. 5 days from now, the Space Shuttle Discovery is scheduled to lift off on the first manned mission since the 1986 Challenger explosion, which killed 7 astronauts and blew apart the United States space program. Since the Challenger disaster, NASA and its contractors have been directed to examine every nut and bolt in the shuttle system in a painstaking inspection and redesign to make sure that it is safe. But even now, as the Discovery sits on its pad at the Kennedy Space Center, we are hearing disturbing reports from safety engineers who worked at Morton Thiokol. That's the company that both made the rocket boosters that destroyed the Challenger and produced the redesigned rockets now on Discovery. Some engineers tell us that Thiokol withheld safety reports, called hazard analyses, which can identify potentially catastrophic problems in the new rockets. The allegations are so serious that the FBI and a federal grand jury are now involved in what has been described as a high-priority investigation. The question is this: has Thiokol ignored or withheld information that could again put the space program and the lives of the astronauts in jeopardy?
I would never ride a space shuttle myself, and I'm an adventuresome soul, but I would never ride one that had a Morton Thiokol booster strapped on it. I don't even want to be around when they assemble the boosters and stack them prior to launch. I think that the entire system is very unsafe.
Hazards all through seem to be about, the lowest priority of all the work that was going on there.
Cost, schedule, and performance was driving the design, not safety and reliability.
These safety engineers were hired to examine in detail the solid rocket boosters of the Space Shuttle Discovery, which has now undergone a $1.2 billion review and redesign to make it safer and more reliable. The 5 astronauts who will ride the Discovery are making final preparations for the launch, but several safety engineers who have analyzed the rockets that will blast the astronauts into space tell us that those rockets may contain dozens of flaws. Flaws that could have been eliminated or better controlled had hazard analyses been available to NASA during the redesign of the solid rocket boosters. Were there ever hazard reports that simply suggested there have to be a redesign in some component?
That's a no-no.
Unacceptable.
Totally unacceptable.
Never
would happen.
And it would never get up the line.
It was not allowed to appear. It would not be allowed to be documented. You might document it on a draft, but it would never be allowed to go forward.
Ron Clary worked as a contract safety engineer for Morton Thiokol from March to October 1987 and says he left on good terms with the company. In other words, if you said this component, whatever it might be, isn't designed right, it needs to be designed differently, what would happen?
You'll likely get laid off.
Clary and other engineers charge that Morton Thiokol and NASA may be repeating the same pattern of neglect that led to the deaths of the Challenger crew 2.5 years ago.
We have main engine start, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
It was Thiokol management that failed to listen to its own engineers in 1986 when they warned that launching the solid rocket boosters in unusually cold temperatures could cause a catastrophic accident.
Challenger, go with throttle up. Challenger, go with throttle up.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
After the tragedy, a presidential panel known as the Rogers Commission found that the O-ring seals in the rocket booster had failed. And while NASA and Morton Thiokol had known about the problems with the O-rings for nearly 10 years, they failed to correct them.
It's a kind of Russian roulette. It was a risk, you got away with it, but it shouldn't be done over and over again.
The commission concluded that NASA and Morton Thiokol had been gambling with the astronauts' lives by lowering safety standards to meet the overly ambitious launch-driven schedule.
The system that was in place at the time of Challenger had worked with a degree of success in 24 prior launches. So the entire group of people who were involved in it, I think, had grown comfortable with the checks and balances that existed at that time. Now, it's clear after the fact that comfort was misplaced.
Dick Davis is a vice president at Morton Thiokol and the solid rocket motor program manager. By late '85, the Rogers Commission said that the O-rings had nearly failed, had problems in 10 of 23 flights. At that point, why did Morton Thiokol stop the launch schedule and say, wait a minute, we know we have a problem here, let's do something about it?
Well, I think it was determined by the team, both Morton Thiokol and NASA, that while the evidence was disturbing, it was not a sufficient cause to stop the flight program.
To make sure the mistakes weren't repeated, the Rogers Commission told NASA to set up an independent safety organization. It told Morton Thiokol to redesign the booster joints, to do a complete hazard analysis as part of the redesign effort, and to make sure that information flowed smoothly to the top.
In every case, we went back and challenged all of the design assumptions that were involved in all of the components and the sub-assemblies, the manufacturing techniques, and the inspection techniques.
Several months after the redesign of the rockets began, Thiokol hired a team of more than 25 short-term troubleshooters to review all the critical items for safety. These were contract engineers, not full-time employees of Thiokol, who were brought in as needed to make safety evaluations. One of the first to be hired was Stephen Agee. How did you document your concerns?
We'd write them up as a hazard analysis, and it would say what the problem is, why it's a problem, and what the causes and effects of the problem are, and it turned out that the vast majority were catastrophic in nature. Loss of life, loss of mission, loss of equipment.
Agee says that during the 5 months he was at Thiokol, he wrote over 200 hazard analyses like these. His first assignment was to report on the solid rocket booster's nozzle, which controls the direction of the rocket thrust, and which has been the object of considerable redesign efforts.
I told my boss, Kent McKinnon, I'd found a tremendous number of problems in the nozzle that simply were violations of the simple fundamental rules of physics and good engineering. And he said, wonderful, write them up, let's get it moving. However,
but Agee, who is now suing Thiokol, says his hazard reports on the nozzle upset his boss's supervisor so much that he was transferred to another part of the rocket that was considered to be relatively trouble-free, the system which ignited the booster.
Well, inside this device, I found such things as wires which were unshielded and ungrounded. There was a lot of grounding problems. And Morton Thiokol was just simply not willing to discuss them. I tried to get roundtable meetings, could not force one to happen.
Agee says that he was so concerned that the hazard reports were not getting to NASA in time to affect the redesign that he went to the FBI. He took with him a letter drafted by his boss in January 1987 to the head of a NASA safety review panel. It said in part, quote, Thiokol management doesn't really want me to identify anything that might make the company look bad.
My boss was fighting wars with his bosses to bring these hazards forward, and a number of other disastrous things were going on, all of which the bottom line is that the hazard analysis were not going forward.
We reviewed all the hazard analysis, all of them that was done. NASA reviewed those.
Alex McCool heads NASA's new safety office at Marshall Space Flight Center, which is responsible for supervising the redesign of the solid rocket boosters. Does Morton Thiokol, as a contractor, have the option of giving you the hazard analysis it wants to give you, or does it have to give you all of them? Can it withhold ones that it says, well, look, this isn't really important and we aren't going to send this up?
Well, no, they don't have that prerogative. He doesn't have the prerogative to hold back some hazard analysis. We're going to see all of them.
But the FBI isn't sure of that. They took Agee seriously, wiring him with a secret recorder for 3 months to tape conversations with Thiokol employees. Agee says he also delivered hundreds of documents to the FBI. And Agee wasn't the only concerned engineer.
These hazards have been written. They have been submitted through appropriate channels. The fact that they disappear is not, I don't feel responsible for that. I feel that Thiokol is responsible for that.
Ron Clary has never been approached by the FBI. How many hazard reports did you prepare personally during the time you were at Thiokol?
Oh, totally, when I was there, I produced over 400, I would say.
Over 400 concerns you had?
Yeah.
What happened to the hazard reports?
A lot of them were erased, lost in the computer system. I didn't bother redoing them. I didn't have time to redo them. One guy would lose like 50 or 100. And then he would go recreate them, and, 3 weeks later he'd lose them again. But in total, hundreds must have been lost. You're being robbed. It's a left-handed way of suppressing a safety concern.
The engineers, people who were doing the hazard reports, have said to us that they were brought in to troubleshoot, to find the problems.
Yeah.
And that these just didn't make it up the line to NASA. There wasn't even a common format. And for 6 months, nothing essentially made it out of Thiokol.
Yeah.
Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that. I'm sorry, no. I'm not aware of that.
I can assure you that there were no hazards analyses and no hazards analysts' work that was ignored or neglected. It may not have been done on the pace that that individual would have liked to have seen it be done on, but it got attention both by Morton Thiokol and by NASA.
Every one of them?
Yeah, every one of them.
So every one of the hazard analyses that were generated by your team of people were individually looked at,
That's right,
reviewed by NASA people?
That's correct.
Did you personally ever see hazard reports being thrown out?
Yeah. When people would leave or people get laid off, it was fairly routine to go through their papers. See, they just walk out and leave everything there, go through their papers, throw things in front.
In other words, once you finished...
Yeah. Once you were not physically there, whatever your work was, you got thrown away.
That normal operating procedure then?
I saw it happen several times when other people would leave.
In some cases, the hazards analysis were reviewed.
By a NASA representative?
Yes.
And in some cases not?
In some cases, they were not.
Arun Murthy worked as a consulting engineer in system safety at Morton Thiokol for 8 months, until August of last year. By that time, he says the redesign of the rocket boosters was essentially complete, and it was too late for the safety reports to affect redesign changes.
Now it was a major issue to consider a redesign. So you would have a great deal of other factors, many of them that have nothing to do with scientific endeavor, that would now play into the equation of whether we should accept this safety recommended design change.
What things would be considered?
Launch schedules, the geopolitics of the situation, your expert preferences for one design over another, the investment in the existing infrastructure.
So according to Murthy and other engineers, even if the reports were not intentionally suppressed, they had little or no impact during the critical redesign of the solid rocket boosters.
There was no attempt made to suppress any hazards that had been identified by anyone, in spite of the fact that some of them might have not appeared to be very serious from the outset.
If hazard analyses weren't suppressed, but were lost through careless supervision, dumped, or in some way didn't make their way into the system, and not 1 or 2 or 50, but several hundred, would that in any way compromise the system and compromise what's on the pad today?
If there are several hundred hazard analyses that have not been reviewed, then that additional review should be accomplished to be sure that there's nothing in there that contains an implied risk as far as the flight reliability is concerned.
But if there are hazard analyses missing, they can't possibly be reviewed before the first launch. And the FBI doesn't know yet whether reports were suppressed or laws broken. Meanwhile, the astronauts are ready to go. Has Morton Thiokol given NASA, the American people, the astronauts, its best effort?
Yes. The rocket motors that are on the launch pad down at Cape Kennedy are reliable rocket motors, and they will work the way they're intended. We believe it has been subjected to a great deal of rigorous analysis and second guessing, both within Morton Thiokol and within NASA and within the government, and we believe it to be the safest solid rocket motor that's flying today.
The system under which you were working at Thiokol,
yeah,
based on what you know, is it protecting the astronauts adequately?
No.
No question.
No question.
Do you think, based on your own experience at Thiokol, that what's sitting out there at Kennedy on the pad today is as safe as it should be, as it could be?
I wouldn't fly it myself.
In your time at Morton Thiokol, was safety a priority in the redesign of the solid rocket motor and the solid rocket booster?
To me, it was a priority.
A high priority?
A high priority. And that was my job, to surface those concerns and elevate them to the status of a high priority. And that was strictly where my job ended.
So was it a high priority up the line?
The answer is, at that point, you're dealing with an inanimate object. It's called a corporation or an institution, an establishment, where the ideas of safety and the ideas of concurrent design have not been institutionalized.
Would you write it?
No. And I've thought about that before, and the answer is no.
We asked NASA whether there is concern about launching the space shuttle while the FBI investigation is still going on. A spokesperson told us that NASA takes any allegation of safety problems very seriously, but that NASA feels it has a very thorough system in place that, quote, backstops all its contractors' work. Coming up next. Hi, welcome to West 57. I'm John Ferrugia. If you've ever been in the hospital for surgery, you know it can be frightening, and with good reason. It's one time in your life that you give up total control, in some cases literally putting your life in a doctor's hands. But what if that surgeon is incompetent or even dangerous? Wouldn't the hospital know and make sure he couldn't operate? Wouldn't his colleagues spread the word? Not necessarily. 2.5 years ago, a Navy heart surgeon named Dr. Donald Billig made headlines as one of the few doctors ever convicted for the deaths of his patients. But it wasn't the first time his patients had died amidst charges of incompetence. In fact, it had been happening for 20 years, and his patients were the last to know.
I didn't understand why it happened. I didn't understand how it happened.
4.5 years ago, Lily Grubb lost her husband Frank after heart surgery. Unable to live with the memories, she's moving out of the house they lived in for 17 years. Her husband was a low-risk candidate for surgery, and she couldn't understand what went wrong until she got his charts.
One of the vessels around the heart was blocked. They had sutured it in such a fashion that blood would not flow through it.
Commander Billig, can you give us your reaction, sir?
Dr. Donald Billig was then charged by the Navy with the deaths of Frank Grubb and 4 others, with practicing surgery knowing he wasn't competent to do so. In fact, knowing he was legally blind in one eye.
I feel that if a doctor knows he is incapacitated, that's no different than a drunk getting into a car and driving a car off and killing somebody.
At least Lily Grubb knows what killed her husband. Here?
Yes, sir.
Can you see the valve? Billig's career has left a trail of patients who will never know he may have caused them injury or even death. Few of his colleagues will talk about him. He is protected, say critics, by a medical wall of silence. What's more, after serving 2 years in prison, Dr. Billig is once again looking for a job. He had agreed to talk with us, but backed out when he learned we were looking into his past history. The first sign of trouble in that history came in 1968, when he arrived at this hospital in Boston with a resume including training under renowned heart surgeon Dr. Michael DeBakey. No one at the New England Medical Center would talk to us, but from court and government documents, we learned the fate of one of his first patients. She was a small child, and Dr. Billig was to operate with a senior surgeon to repair a septal defect, a hole in her heart. Billig started the operation early, and by the time the senior surgeon arrived, the child was dying. Billig had sewn the patch in the wrong place. In government documents and background interviews, surgeons who didn't want to be identified stated that Billig was incompetent and had high mortality rates. They say he was asked to leave in 1972, but in letters of recommendation, he was called a positive and valuable member of the staff, so he moved on. At Hahnemann Hospital in Philadelphia, we learned, again from doctors who did not want their names to be used, that Billig stopped getting patients after poor surgery results. Again, he was pressured to leave.
They finally, at the end of 3.5 years, told him that he would be the subject of an academic council if he wasn't gone by June of 1976.
So at Hahnemann, he was also fired?
Yes.
Marilyn Billig, now divorced, was married to Donald Billig for 18 years. Since his trial, she has been piecing together her personal experience with court documents to write a history of his career and the system that made it possible.
Part of the system is get him out of our hospital, grease his way with recommendations.
Case in point, the chairman of Billig's department at Hahnemann wrote confidentially to another hospital that it had been impossible for him to perform in a successful manner because he attacked such complicated cases. Yet he also wrote in a letter of recommendation that Billig was capable, cooperative, and dependable, and that he recommended him without reservation. So, Billig moved on again.
The recommendations which came were excellent. They were lengthy and enthusiastic.
Dr. Cyril Arvanitis was at Monmouth Medical Center in New Jersey when Billig arrived in 1976.
All right, well, who's her doctor?
The doctors here got worried when Billig's cases were cited far too often at conferences to discuss unexpected deaths and complications.
There was a steady demonstration of poor judgment, poor technique, and an unacceptable level of complications.
What kinds of complications?
Well, hemorrhage is a complication, a wound infection is a complication, a breakdown of an artery which has been repaired is a complication. Death, of course, is the ultimate complication. And he was having more of these than we felt he should be having.
Dr. Arvanitis was one of the few doctors to speak out on Billig. As head of surgery at Monmouth, he began a peer review process that found serious problems in 50 of Billig's cases. Billig was dismissed from the hospital and surrendered his medical license in New Jersey. Did you tell him at any point that he shouldn't be doing surgery?
Yes, the last day that he was here, before he left, I told him, I said, Don, you really should get yourself a job someplace, not operating on people.
The report that Monmouth sent to the New Jersey Board of Medical Examiners charged Billig with unmistakable negligence and technical incompetence and unacceptable mortalities. Monmouth was the first hospital to inform state authorities about Billig, but it never informed his patients. Patients like Howard S. According to hospital documents, his death was directly related to Dr. Billig's performance of an ill-advised elective aneurysm procedure. Billig operated on him 4 times in 1 week, twice to correct previous mistakes. Brenda Ramseur was another one of Billig's mistakes, according to the hospital. He operated on her in 1979 because of a spot on her lung.
He told me that I should have the surgery done because within 6 months to a year, I would probably die of cancer.
Early last year, Ramseur learned from a private investigator that the hospital considered her surgery unnecessary and that hers was one of the cases that caused Billig to be dismissed.
I felt violated when I found it out. I was never told anything. What does that make me? I feel like I'm a guinea pig. I was used as a guinea pig.
After the surgery, Ramseur had breathing problems and at times lost the use of her left arm. She now has to take pain medication, and she still doesn't know exactly what happened in the operating room.
How many more people is the system going to allow this man to hurt? That's my question.
Despite Billig's dismissal and the loss of his license in New Jersey, he once again moved on, this time to Pittsburgh, where he worked for Dr. Manfred Cohen, now retired.
Don Billig is a very aggressive personality with a gigantic ego.
At first impressed with Billig, Dr. Cohen disagreed with the findings at Monmouth and hired him. But 7 months later, he fired Billig because he wasn't responding to emergency room and consultation calls. You fired Dr. Billig, essentially.
Yes.
Fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. Yet you wrote him a fairly glowing recommendation.
No.
Let me just read it so we understand here. His clinical judgment and technical ability were most satisfactory and without fault. That sounds pretty good. If I'm going to hire the guy, I think Dr. Cohen likes this guy.
What would you think if somebody said to you, in your letter of recommendation, I think John's great in your town?
I don't understand.
That letter to me, when someone says someone will be great someplace else, warrants further follow-up. You must appreciate the position that we as physicians are in. Okay? If I were to say Don Billing is incompetent, or any doctor is incompetent, I have to be prepared to have a civil action filed against me and be called to court to defend what I said.
Once again, Billig moved on, this time to the prestigious Bethesda Naval Hospital, which in 1983 was desperate for a heart surgeon. Billig's academic credentials and letters of recommendation looked good, but one thing that didn't show up were the results of a recent eye exam given to him by Dr. William Reichman.
His vision was poor. He was legally blind in the right eye, and he had no depth perception whatsoever, which to me meant that he was unable to do what he was practicing doing.
It turned out that Billig's right eye had been injured by a tennis ball a few years earlier, which made surgery even more difficult for him. He told various employers his vision was fine. In fact, it was seriously impaired.
For instance, if you put one finger in front of another, he could not tell you that it was actually two fingers there. It would just be one finger.
You're telling me that this man's a surgeon, and with his glasses, he was legally blind in one eye?
That's right.
No question?
No question.
Did you tell him that?
I sure did. And I asked him how can he perform surgery without depth perception, and he said, oh, you learn how to adapt. Just very nonchalant about it.
Check your #1 suction bottle to see if it's full.
Blind in one eye, his license surrendered in New Jersey, let go 4 times, Billig began doing heart surgery at Bethesda. Before it was over, there were 21 dead patients. His mortality rate was 8%, compared to a national average of under 2%.
Okay, we're giving a whole liter. All right.
Dr. Russ Zychek, then chief of heart surgery at Walter Reed Hospital, tried to supervise Billig.
There was always the possibility that he would tear the heart or not put the stitches in the right places. I have never worked with any other surgeon who was worse than him in performing heart surgery.
Is there a legitimate difference in opinion as to whether Dr. Billig was competent or incompetent?
Well, let me just make it real simple for you. He was not competent in doing any kind of heart operations. He knew that. I told him that half a dozen times. He's losing patients that should not have been dying.
Billig was finally convicted of negligent homicide and involuntary manslaughter at Bethesda, but he appealed his case. And in a dramatic reversal, a military court said he wasn't to blame for his patients' deaths. The Navy lawyers who prosecuted Billig are still convinced of his guilt. The chief prosecutor has called the reversal an unexplainable aberration and said Billig was a danger to society.
No one in the system is looking out for the patient. Even if one hospital does do its duty stops at the door of its hospital. Unfortunately, those doctors go on to become serial malpracticers. That doctor knows that he has left in his wake a long list of victims.
Billig knows that.
Billig knows that, and the other Dr. Billigs know that. They know the unfortunate results of their surgery, but they never look back. They just move on.
The Billig story continues. The military court that freed him is now itself under investigation for bribery and fraud in the case. Meanwhile, Billig, his record clear, has been reinstated in the American College of Surgeons. He is relicensed in Texas and Pennsylvania and has applied in New York.
Coming up next on West 57th, sex for sale in Amsterdam.
Ten years ago, Natalie Cole stood ready to take her place among the royalty of American rhythm and blues singers. The daughter of jazz great Nat King Cole had it all: talent, looks,
and an inside track to the music business. But it's been said that even royalty has its drawbacks, and Natalie Cole can certainly testify to that. Her father died when she was just 15. When her own singing career began, she thought she could never live up to his reputation, and she nearly destroyed herself trying. Like her father, Natalie Cole is more relaxed on stage, even if it's just rehearsal. It's here where she gives her all, carrying on the Cole legacy. A Bruce Springsteen song, Pink Cadillac, fueled her return to the pop charts. Ironically, because of her father's great talent and popularity, she almost passed up a singing career.
The whole attitude in my family was what my dad did was very special, and I never even considered stepping into his shoes. It would not have been appropriate, it would not have been proper for me to try to carry on that kind of a legacy.
Yet it is her family who in many ways has helped her. Cousin Eddie leads her band.
1, 2, 3.
On the road in London, Cole was joined by her son Robbie, who sometimes sits in on drums, and her mother. Maria Cole once sang with Duke Ellington. Even so, she tried desperately to steer her daughter away from show business.
No, I didn't want her to go into it. But I think most people, most show people who have come up as my husband did, don't want their children in show business because they're afraid they won't become successful. And Matt and I used to talk about that we were afraid that they'd go into this and hear this monumental figure, their father, and to follow that would have been very, as you have seen with a lot of children, it's very difficult.
When I fall in love, it will be forever.
Or I'll never fall in love. In a restless world like this is,
love is ended before it's begun, yeah. And too many moonlight kisses.
One of her most recent successes, When I Fall in Love, became one of the top songs of 1988, but it's been popular before.
When I give my heart, it will be completely.
Nat King Cole was a jazz pianist who rose from playing the honky-tonks to international recording stardom. He was the first black American with his own television show. It failed when advertisers pulled out, saying that a black man just couldn't sell cosmetics. But he and the Cole family were still enough of a draw to be featured in 1957 on Edward R. Murrow's Person to Person.
Good evening, Mrs. Cole.
Good evening, Mr. Cole.
Evening, Nat.
Hi, Ed.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Is that a late release you're checking there?
Well, it's pretty late. It's a new album called Love is the Thing.
Nat King Cole sold over 50 million records before he died in 1965.
It's a big percentage of luck that goes with this business. Being in the right place at the right time and having the right something to offer, too. I mean, I put them all together.
No, that's the same in the news business. You just have to be in the right place at the right time.
That's right.
Natalie grew up the daughter of a millionaire at a time when poverty and segregation for blacks was the norm.
Here's our youngest daughter. This is Sweetie.
Her father called her Sweetie.
Sweetie?
Yeah.
How many of those pups would you like to keep?
All.
All of them?
Yes.
You think you'll be allowed to keep them all?
Well, I don't know.
It was the perfect family, and what a role model for all of America. Edward R. Murrow was coming to your home.
Yeah. That's probably why the Cosby Show was such a hit too, because we were very much like that family. We were.
Ours was sort of I hate to use the adjective, really sort of a confused household some of the time, because I traveled with him and 85% of the time, and it was difficult for those children, for my older children.
At home, was he Nat Cole, the performer, or was he dead?
He was definitely Dad. And that's why the memories of him are so nice. They're so gentle. Because for the time that he did have and spend with us, he was a father.
She had sort of, I have always felt, a special worship for him that was over here, you know. But I think it was really for his talent. And I don't think she really got to know anything but his talent. He loved her, and she loved him. Nat loved all his children, but Nat didn't really get much of a chance to be a daddy.
Even so, Nat King Cole was the anchor of the family, and when he died of lung cancer at age 45, he left behind a daughter who didn't deal with his death until years later.
Her father's death changed this family an awful lot. It sort of, well, it was like this, and it just sort of did this, you know, tore us apart. Something I have chosen not to think too much about because there's nothing I could do about it.
Once my father died, my mother stressed education, education, education. It was about getting our various degrees in college and picking something suitable.
What would you have wanted her to be?
I wanted her to be a doctor.
I had done everything but apply to grad school at USC when all of a sudden I had this singing career. And it took off so quickly. And it was the old classic line of an agent approaching me when I was still at UMass in college. I think I can make you a star. How'd you like to be a star?
Natalie Cole.
She won 3 Grammys on her first 2 albums, but under the facade was a young woman in turmoil.
I always wondered for a long time after that, did I get that really on my own merit? And when you start questioning yourself, okay, you're in trouble.
I can't stand up here too long. I might start testifying. I just want to thank my producers and...
Characterize her at that time when she first started in show business. What kind of person was she?
Headstrong, defiant, talented, even then, not really sure of herself, but good at what she was doing. Confused, very insecure.
Was the pressure great because, you know, she's the king's daughter? She's got to be good.
Yeah, absolutely.
She better be good.
Absolutely. That's more or less what it was. You better be good. At the time, because I was a commodity, people were depending on me to produce, and to be whatever it was that they were expecting me to be.
You're great, is all he'd say.
By 1981, her promising career had skidded on a trail of mediocre albums. Trying to shore herself up, Cole landed instead in the lap of drug and alcohol abuse. Were drugs escaping this, or were they?
No, they weren't escaping. They were helping me deal. They were coping. They were my assistants. They were my right arm, my girl Friday. You know, I got to the point where I couldn't do it without them.
In retrospect, what's the one thing you most regret?
Probably the breakup of my marriage. That really hurt. And I think about that. That if I had been in a different place, that wouldn't have happened.
If you'd have been straight.
Mm-hmm. And then the relationship with my son would be better, and, you know, because he'd have a father, and, you know, it's a cycle. And I think I'd say that was the beginning of the end for me right then and there.
Were you angry then at Nat King Cole?
I don't know. I hate to think that I was, but I probably was. I certainly was angry at myself, you know, for being who I was. And I also was missing him. And, you know, that why why couldn't it be that he could be here to help me through some of this garbage?
Straighten up and fly right. Straighten up and stay right.
For most of her career, Natalie Cole had lived in the shadow of the king. 5 years ago, in a drug rehabilitation center, she started dealing with that and her fractured relationship with her mother.
That had to be for you as a mother, but also seeing her as a performer, professionally, personally, had to be the toughest for you.
It was very tough, very tough. I'd write her long letters, and it just slowly came together. But it was a very difficult time. I couldn't go down to the place to see her. I just felt I had to see her like I'd known her. And it worked.
If there was ever a chance that the moon would never shine again, if there was even the slightest doubt that tomorrow the sun would somehow not come out,
It's a clear-eyed, born-again performer that audiences see these days.
it wouldn't matter to me because I love you.
Her own failures make her worry about her son, who has aspirations of being the next generation in the performing Cole family.
I'm not too thrilled about the idea of my son going into the business. I'm really not. You know. But I guess I think he could handle it, but that's not the point. You want your kid to do well in anything that they choose to do. And you just want them to be ready for the disappointments, you know, and the serious failures that can happen when they choose a certain type of career. And this is that type of a career. Every day I'm wondering how he sees me. How does he really see me? You know, am I his mom or am I Natalie Cole to him? And sometimes I'm both.
Just like your father was to you?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I come home and I'll tell him what I went through that day or what I went through over the weekend, and he just shakes his head and he goes, boy, that's really something. You know, he'll take my hand, shake his head, give me a pat. Well, Mom, it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it.
Stroke that artist, make her sing, whip that.
No. Think of living on the street, no money.
Flower. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. That'll make us, you ain't singing, sing.
All right, no thinking, let's move. It's your song.
Natalie Cole is now rebuilding her career song by song.
Even though it's been so long, my love for you keeps going strong. I remember the things that we used to do. A kiss in the rain till the sun shines through. I try to deny it, but I'm still in love with you.
You can listen to it 55,000 times and you're still not sure if you like it. There's no audience. There's no stimulus. You have to create it yourself. Not only that, but there are other people telling you what to do.
No matter
What about, well, then we should be here.
Producer Michael Masser has been a hitmaker for the likes of Whitney Houston and Diana Ross. He only works on a couple of songs a year, and he chose Natalie Cole to sing one of them. Miss You Like Crazy is her new single.
No matter what I say or do, there's just no getting over you, and I miss you.
The hardest thing to do when you're successful is to be consistent. You know, can you do it again? Can you top yourself? And anybody out there knows exactly what I'm talking about. And it's a bitch. It's very, very difficult.
You think we're going to have a hit with this, Natalie?
Jesus Christ, if we don't, I'm going to kill you.
It's just a constant battle between what I want to do, what people expect of me. Would my father like it? Will my family be proud? Will my record company make money? Will I make money? There's, you know, endless questions that you have to ask yourself. And it just keeps coming back to the same thing. Do I feel good about this?
I can see the love shining in your eyes, and it comes as such a sweet surprise.
I see now an older, but a younger Natalie. By that I mean she might be older chronologically, but she's acting a lot like the kid I knew. before her father died, 13 or 14, which I like.
Mm. She's back.
Yeah, she's back.
If you are figuring the odds-on favorite for Best Actor this year, Edward James Olmos may not be near the top of your list, but that's nothing new. Eddie Olmos has been a dark horse before. That you may know. But what you may not know is that it's been more than just great acting that's brought him the Academy Award nomination. To his friends, Edward James Olmos is a man in touch with his values and his heritage. And win or lose next Wednesday night, that won't change.
Welcome to Miami.
Most people know Edward James Olmos as Martin Castillo, the brooding, mysterious lieutenant whose character serves as the leader for a group of crime-busting cops on Miami Vice.
You know this guy? Lieutenant?
Yeah, I know. On this man's level, death is a profession.
I knew that after the first time I appeared on this program, that my life would never be the same again out in the street. So that when they see you, they go, hey, I know you. You know, you're Geraldo Rivera.
With Miami Vice now in its final season, few people mistake Edward James Olmos for a talk show host. The series has made him the best-known Hispanic actor of his generation.
Castillo has a tremendous sense of values. He's probably one of the most quiet and integrity-filled characters I've ever been a part of.
Is that what drew you to this character?
No, what drew me to the character was twofold. One was the fact that they gave me artistic control of the character. Second of all, they gave me a non-exclusive contract.
The non-exclusive contract meant he could work on other projects about real-life characters, like Jaime Escalante, a celebrated math teacher from an East Los Angeles high school. In Escalante, Olmos found a character whose values mirror his own.
Are the times tables?
I knew the ones, the twos, the threes.
Are you the finger man? I'm the finger man too. You know what I can do? I know how to multiply by 9. How about 8 times 9? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. What do you got? 72.
The role of a math teacher in the film Stand and Deliver may not sound like a star vehicle by Hollywood standards, but it's Olmos' dedication to just these kinds of parts that have earned him respect in the industry. Last month, when some of the brightest stars came out for the Golden Globe Awards, the only actor to be nominated for his work in both TV and the movies was Edward James Olmos. He was there with his wife of more than 20 years, Kaya. But this is only one side of the real person.
Nothing could have stopped me from getting here today. I've worked hard, real hard, for 27 years to understand myself since the age of 13.
The weekend before the Golden Globes, he traveled from Miami to California and back to honor 5 teenage inmates at a youth prison who were receiving college degrees. This is only one of hundreds of such events he's done over the past 15 years.
I'm a homeboy, but I ain't no different than any one of you. Not 1 ounce. Even as you're sleeping, man. Yoo-hoo. Hey, don't hit me, man. Hey, man. Why did they hit you, man? I came a long way, man, just to say good morning. You know, man, I come from the corner of First and Indiana in East LA. I was born in East LA. Orale. They should have never let this homeboy out of town, man.
It was the heart of East Los Angeles, not unlike the setting of his film Stand and Deliver, where this homeboy got his start.
We couldn't play on the street here because it's kind of, well, it's dangerous.
Yeah. Esperanza Olmos, Eddie's sister, gave us a tour of the neighborhood and the house where the Olmos kids grew up.
It was a tough neighborhood. All around, you were like surrounded by different gangs, you know, people trying to hold on to their little space.
Was the pressure on Eddie to join?
I think on them a lot more than it was on me. I didn't feel any of it until like maybe junior high school, but they felt it, I think, even in elementary school.
Our street was a very small street, Cheeseborough Lane, which was right on bordered 3 different areas that bred the gangs. So we actually were the neutral ground. And so I didn't have to join any one gang. But yeah, had I been just 1 block either way, I would have had to been part of the situation. You had to.
I know it would hurt him every time he heard, as we grew older, like in the teens, it would hurt him to hear that, you know, a few of his friends had been killed, and they would never really explain what had happened to them. Many times the parents would just say that he's no longer with us, and that's it.
Olmos stayed out of the gangs mostly because of a strong early family life and a near addiction to baseball. But there was nothing to suggest he would ever get into show business. He first became a performer when he was still in high school, singing in a rock band. And if Eddie had a little better voice, he may never have become an actor. He and his band recorded this song in the late 1960s on their one and only album.
It didn't take a professional quality voice. It took more of searching inside and letting the style come out and the individuality.
Come back to me and set me free now.
Those were the years when I had, on the stage, we used to play 3 rock bands. And we had like the Doors and Buffalo Springfield, along with Eddie James and the Pacific Ocean. That was the name of his band in those days. After 3 years, he got so hot that he was probably singularly responsible for packing my club every night he was here, as opposed to the other bands.
Bill Gazzari has owned a club on the Sunset Strip for more than 25 years.
His energy was the highest level I've ever seen. As he was singing and his rubber legs were going, he would do splits, he'd hit that floor and he'd crawl back up, and this is all while he's singing rock and roll.
It was performing as a rock singer that led Eddie Olmos to acting. He began in small, offbeat productions.
They used to call them brick and stick theaters. They would give you a brick and a stick when you walked in and sat down to watch the show. The brick was for the cockroaches, the stick was for the rats. Sit there, boom,
you know? When you decided, well, I'm going to try this acting, I mean, how'd you go about it?
Well, I didn't say, I'm Eddie Olmos, I'm going to be an actor. I said, I'm Edward Olmos, and I'd like to know who I am. And through a sense of trying to find out really who I was, I started soul-searching.
Still struggling as an actor and unable to get any decent parts, Olmos finally got a chance to perform for an audience that made him feel like a star.
Somebody asked me if I would go speak to a bunch of kids. And I said, yeah. Why not? I got the time. So during the day, I would go out and instead of going to acting class, I would go out and talk to kids. And then I'd go back and perform at night.
And were you feeling the obligation to do that then?
No, I was feeding off of it. It was like energy base. It was wonderful. I mean, it was fantastic.
On his own, he would visit youth authorities. He would go to juvenile halls, and he would perform and meet the kids, and he'd really want to bring out the best in them.
Father Richard Estrada is the pastor of the church at La Placida. It is known as the International Town Square of Los Angeles, the first stop for many new immigrants. Estrada has known Olmos since 1978, when the priest was the chaplain at the Central Juvenile Hall.
These kids would just be right there with him, and then he'd punch them. He'd just say, you know, you can, you know, like leave these drugs, you can do all these things, you can get an education, you can be somebody.
Finally, 14 years after he started acting, Eddie Olmos got his big break. It was a play called Zoot Suit, a musical about street gangs in East L.A. In Zoot Suit, he portrayed the pivotal role of El Pachuco, a street gang leader.
Zoot Suit was the first American play dealing with Hispanic American themes on Broadway, ever, and in the main stages. The Hispanic community, all Hispanic communities throughout the country rejoiced in that, because you got to remember, the arts are the only way that you can really see the soul of a culture, of a people, of a human being.
He is the kind of actor who can stand perfectly still, as he did in Zoot Suit, and as he often does in Miami Vice, and yet projects a certain energy. You know, there's movement there, in spite of a stillness.
Luis Valdez wrote and directed Zoot Suit for the stage and later on film.
His attraction lies in his personal power, in his ability to be able to focus his human energies and then to communicate this directly to the audience so that you feel empowered by him.
And that's clear when you hear him speak. To the kids in the prison, he's a star who made it out of the barrio. El Pachuco, Lieutenant Castillo, and Jaime Escalante all rolled into one.
The only difference between me and you guys right there is that I was lucky. I didn't get caught. You weren't so lucky. You got caught. But I'll tell you this much right now, man. There are two kinds of dead times. There's dead time when you're in here and you can't get out, and you do something with it. And then there's dead time, when you just sit here and you do nothing with it.
People are pointing to you and saying, that guy's a symbol. Do you see yourself as that?
I don't see myself as that, but people do see me that way, yes. That's a tremendous strength there. When an entire culture is saying, yeah, that represents us. That's what we are like. That's an incredible strength.
We've been practicing for this all year. You're the best.
Wednesday night, when they call his name as nominee for Best Actor, Edward James Olmos will stand as a symbol for Hispanics, but he'll deliver a message for all of us.
I told you could do it. Okay, Kamasaki. Okay.
Get out of here! Minerva! Chocalo! Minerva! Minerva! Minerva!
I've never seen this before in my life. I've heard about it in the old days, but I've never seen it. Forget about it. Frankie, do you believe in this? Show me a Rome that doesn't believe, and I'll show you a lie.
Frankie, tell me, what did you see, Frankie?
Nothing,
tell me.
Angelo. Forget about it. Chicago or Batalai. Dick, Dick, suscita da. Oi, Dick, 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 Dick. Cerete będzie trusul, cer trusul. Cer trusul. Tu suscita o bang fam. Chocano ci dono ime suscidevo.
Astăzi, mulțumine, Rom Chocano.
Ce fi ciocanul, Frankie, jata, Frankie.
Frankie,
jata, Frankie.
Nadara. Nadara. Angelo.
Jata, Frankie.
Make sure hands will see Picasso. Bate like Picasso.
You know we passed this hut when we came in? Maybe it's us too.
I had it. I just forget about this ring. Forget about the ring, forget about the light, forget about everything. Dosta. No, forget about the ring, Angelo. Forget about it. The ring's not worth it, believe me. I mean it, that's enough. You want the door open? All right, now don't, Dosta. Angelo, you seen at the cab, Angelo. He was only after him. He only bothered him, Angelo.
Come on, enough is enough. Let's go. Look for this. Let's go, Preto. My grandmother used to talk about these things in the camps a long time ago. Get some sleep, Frankie.
Ce n-am mai stăcat eu. Asta e right, Ale, da tu ți-ga ciocai. Ale, dar patu te ciocai. Ca ți-ga ciocai, stale patu te dar ciocai, cădea. Mai mic. Hai plămejea, hamingă. Will it happen? Te leu patu ce